So let's tackle a huge question, one that hits all of us right in the wallet. Do wars and international conflicts actually make everything more expensive? A really groundbreaking study has some answers, and they might surprise you. Let's dive in.
And look, this isn't some abstract academic question, right? When you see headlines about conflicts happening thousands of miles away, it's easy to think it doesn't affect you. But those ripple effects, they can show up at the gas station, in your grocery bill, even the price of your morning coffee. So, what is the real story here?
Okay, so this is where you get this incredible economic tug of war. On one side of the rope, you have all these forces that are trying to yank prices higher. Supply chains get all tangled up, governments start spending a ton more money. But on the other side, you have forces pulling prices down. When people get scared and uncertain, they stop spending. So, which side wins?
So, how do we figure out who wins this tug of war? Well, to settle the debate, researchers went on an absolute epic deep dive. They combed through more than 100 years of economic data from all over the world to find out what really happens when things get tense.
And the verdict is in. It's really unambiguous. Geopolitical risks don't just cause one problem, they cause two at the same time. Prices go up while the economy slows way down. It's this toxic cocktail that economists call stagflation. And trust me, it's a total nightmare for pretty much everyone. All right, so why? Why does this happen? To really get it, let's break down that economic tug of war into what economists call shocks. These are the two big forces pulling in opposite directions. First up, you've got your supply-side shocks. Just think about it. A factory can't get its hands on raw materials because of a conflict somewhere. That's a supply-side shock. It's basically anything that messes with the economy's ability to actually produce things and get them to you. So when a crisis hits, the whole ability of the economy to just make stuff takes a massive hit. International trade shrinks, shortages pop up everywhere, and the prices of essentials like oil and food can just go through the roof. And tragically, you also have the destruction of what's called capital, both physical things like factories and, devastatingly, human capital, which is the workforce. All of this means fewer goods to go around, which, you guessed it, pushes prices way up. Now, on the other end of the rope in this tug of war, you have demand-side shocks. And this one is maybe a little more intuitive. If you're worried about the future, are you going to go out and buy a brand new car? Probably not. It's all about how much people, companies, and governments are actually willing to spend. Okay, but here's where it gets really, really interesting, because the effects are pulling in opposite directions. On the one hand, nervous people spend less, which you'd think would bring prices down. But at the exact same time, governments are flooding the economy with money for military spending and taking on huge amounts of debt. And it turns out that fire hose of government spending completely overwhelms the cautious consumer, pushing inflation up much, much higher. So that's the theory, right? Supply versus demand. But what does the hard data actually say? The researchers didn't just stop there. They went digging through the historical archives to find the proof. And when I say they looked at the data, I mean they really looked. This was not some small sample. We're talking more than a century of data, spanning 44 different countries, from the big economic powerhouses to smaller, emerging nations. This gives us a picture that holds true across tons of different times and places. So what's the big takeaway? The bottom line? After a major geopolitical shock, inflation typically spikes by 2 percentage points. Now, that might not sound like a crazy number, but think about it. If inflation is already kind of high, say at 3%, this pushes it up to 5%. That's a massive bite out of your paycheck. And as if that's not bad enough, while prices are shooting up, the economy itself is shrinking. A 2% drop in GDP is a really big deal. It means fewer jobs, stagnant wages, and just less opportunity for everybody. This is that stagflation we talked about in action, and it is painful. The study also dug into a really fascinating distinction. Just the threat of a conflict, the rising tension, is enough to start pushing prices up. But when that threat becomes a reality, an actual act of war, you can see the impact on inflation is way, way bigger. The fear of conflict is bad for your wallet, but the reality? So much worse. Look, this isn't just some dusty history lesson about things that happened a century ago. To prove just how relevant this is right now, the study took its model and applied it to a conflict we all remember.
So the researchers basically mapped out the timeline. They tracked that rising tide of geopolitical risk from those early tensions in January 2022 to the invasion in February, all the way to the peak of the crisis in April. This let them really zero in on the economic consequences. And what they found? Well, it's pretty staggering. Their model estimates that the invasion added a whopping 1.2 percentage points to global inflation, shaved a full percentage point off of global GDP, and was responsible for a 5% drop in global stock prices. These are the real-world costs of conflict, in black and white.
So you might be asking, why is this such a massive headache for policymakers, for the folks in charge of the economy? Well, it's because it puts them between a rock and a hard place. If they try to fight inflation by raising interest rates, they risk crushing the already weak economy. But if they try to boost the economy, they could just pour more fuel on the fire of inflation. There are just no easy answers. And that really brings us to the big, sobering question we have to ask ourselves. As we look around at a world that seems to be getting more and more unstable, is this kind of geopolitical inflation just the new normal? The research we've looked at today certainly suggests that as long as tensions are simmering around the globe, our wallets are probably going to keep feeling the heat.